Hi guys, this is Elisa with FusionDIY. Welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, welcome. I'm so glad that you found my channel, and I hope that you enjoy the 3 projects that I'm going to share with you today. They definitely put me in the spring mood, and hopefully they will with you too. And I'll show you how one project that I thought was going to turn out one way actually turned out a different way. So let's go. So this is a headboard that I picked up off the side of the road, and I knew that when I picked it up I was going to make a coat rack out of the headboard. So here I am trying to find the center of the headboard, and I am going to put a chain on the back of the headboard to make sure that it is a very sturdy piece to be hung on the wall. And there's my chain. So I found the center of my board. Now I'm trying to find the center of my chain, and I'm going to match up the two so that the chain is centered to the headboard. Once I've found the center, I'm going to make 2 marks, one on each side, so I know where to drill to put the screws in that are going to hold the chain onto the board. And I do this as a routine just to make sure that there's no chance of the chain coming out, so I screw it to the board. And this is a very, very sturdy method for hanging the board on the wall. So once the chain is attached, I'm going to flip the board over and I'm going to wipe it down and give it a good clean before I begin to paint it. The product that I'm using to clean the board is a product called Awesome, and you can find that in the dollar store, and it does an awesome job. It's a great cleaner. Now I'm using leftover paint that's bare chalk paint in the color Noir. When I finished giving the board a first coat of paint, I took my heat gun and then I dried the board so that I could then give it a second coat. And if you don't have a heat gun and you're a DIYer, oh my gosh, you need to have one. They work so great. So I gave it a second coat, and I'm drying this one as well. Once I was sure the paint was dry, I took my stencil and I laid it down, and here I'm just measuring to make sure that it is centered on the board. So now that I have my stencil centered, I use some painter's tape just to hold the stencil down while I am stenciling. I know that there are some people that just prefer to hold the stencil, but I don't trust myself, and I don't want to run the risk of having the stencil shift while I am putting the paint on. And you can see that I'm dabbing the paint, and the key, if you've never stenciled before, is getting as much paint off of your sponge or your brush as much as possible, so that when you are tamping down on the stencil, you're not pushing that paint underneath the letters and the numbers. Okay, so now I'm going to reveal how it turned out. It really turned out nice, and I really liked it a lot. And at this point, I stopped recording because I wanted to take my stencil and clean it. And that's really important to provide some longevity to your stencil, that you clean it right after you use it while you're waiting for your paint to dry. After my paint dried, I gave it a good sanding and wanted it to look very aged. So I sanded it and did take off some of that paint, which was what I intended to do. So after I cleaned it up, I gave it 2 coats of polyurethane and I let it dry overnight. The next day I came back and I hated how it looked. So I painted the board white and I came back with that same bare paint, and now I'm going to use that paint to actually stencil the letters onto the board. And I like this so much more. I felt the black one with the white lettering was way too dark. So now I'm going to distress it and give it a real aged look. And now I'm going to go back and give it 2 coats of the Rust-Oleum polyurethane. And once again, I'm taking my heat gun and I'm going to dry that. Once the polyurethane was dry, I drilled some pilot holes for the hooks for this board, and I actually put 5 hooks on the board. It's kind of hard to see how many are there, but there's actually 5. One thing that I did notice is that when I tried to screw in the first hook, it was very difficult, so I had to go back and drill the holes a little bit deeper. So that's what I'm doing here, and now I'm just taking my screwdriver just to screw them all in. Once I got the hooks on, I just gave it a final wipe down, and I really love how it turned out. And I really am glad that I went from the black board with the white writing to the white board with the black writing. And here it is in my booth. For project 2, this is 2 pieces that I married together. This plywood board I picked up when I was at the Bethlehem Steel Stacks flea market back in September, and I also found a candlestick that I thought would go great with it, and I would make it a riser. And so I did E6000, the 2 pieces together, and now I am just giving the whole thing a coat of white paint. When the top was dry, I turned it over and put it on my Lazy Susan, and I gave a coat of paint to the underneath, and I gave a second coat to the candlestick. I kind of figured I was going to do something with the top anyway, so I didn't really give it a second coat. I wasn't sure if I was going to do a transfer or decoupage paper. So what actually happened was I put this aside and it sat painted in my stash for about 6 months. And then my supermarket came through with these beautiful napkins. They were 3-ply dinner napkins, and I saw them and they just shouted spring to me. So I decided that I was going to decoupage this napkin onto this and turn it into a really pretty springtime riser. So that's what I'm doing here. And you can see I start with a starter strip, and that holds my paper in place while I then go down the rest of the board and I am decoupaging the remainder of the piece onto it. Now, I don't know where this round came from. As I said, I picked it up at a flea market, but you can see it's not 100% round. There's on the right-hand side there's just a little bit of a cutoff. So this is a cutout for something that someone was doing, and it doesn't matter to me because I just thought it was so pretty anyway. And you really can barely notice that little piece there is missing on the side, and it's not perfectly round. So once I got finished putting down the decoupage paper, I went around the edges and then I let it sit overnight. And then the following evening, I came back and I sanded off the residual paper that was left. And you could see all you do is in a downward motion, you're going to use your sandpaper and you're going to come in contact with that edge, and you're just going to remove the decoupage paper. It's very, very easy, and it just makes your edges look so clean and crisp. And once that was done, then I turned it over and I just cleaned up the edges on the underneath so that when you looked at the riser from underneath, you didn't see any leftover pieces of decoupage paper. And then I went around the edges again just to make sure that everything was glued down and it was good to go. And then I decided that I was going to maybe paint the base of the candlestick a color purple or lilac. And so I opted for this particular color. It's a pretty color, but after I painted it, and I'll show you what it looks like here. After I started painting it, I started to second guess myself. And I thought, maybe I shouldn't have done that. So I finished painting it and I hated it. And so once it dried, I went back and I repainted it white. And here it is in my booth. I thought it turned out so pretty. For my final project, this was a sign that I had hanging in my booth for a while. It did not sell, so I took it down and I decided to do something else with it. So I'm sanding off the farmhouse so that it doesn't show through, and then I'm taking my Rust-Oleum linen white chalk paint and I am going to give it 2 coats of the linen white chalk paint. And once again, out comes my trusty heat gun, and I'm going to dry that paint, and then I can go back and I can give it a second coat. You can kind of see a shadow of the word farmhouse coming through the paint, which is why it needed a second coat. So now I'm taking a couple of stencils and my IOD letterpress, and I'm going to combine a couple of stencils and the letters. And there's no law that says that you can't do that. If you've got stencils and you want to combine a few things, by all means, play around with your products and what you have and just enjoy being creative. You can kind of see here that I'm trying to see how the word milk is going to fit on this board. So I'm just trying to space out the letters to make sure that everything fits before I start painting. And once again, I'm going to use some painter's tape to hold my stencils in place so that once I start stenciling, I don't have to worry about them shifting. And you can see there's just a very, very little bit of paint in that tray there, and I'm using some leftover foam rubber that I had from a project. I cut it up into pieces, and I actually use this to do my stenciling. So that, again, the secret to stenciling is to offload the majority of the paint off of your sponge or your brush. So now that that's done, I'm going to go and stencil the cow. And I just think this guy is so cute. And it's such a great feeling when you pull that stencil off to know that your hard work has paid off. Okay, there's my cow. And now I am going to take the IOD letters, spelling out the word milk, and I'm going to ink the letters, and then I'm going to put the letters, put the piece onto the board. Now I can tell you what happened was that the way that this board was cut, and you'll see when I pick up the stencil how it just didn't work. So I inked it again and I tried a second time, and it came out a little bit darker, but at that point I decided I wasn't going to play around with it anymore, and I'm just going to go back and I'm going to touch it up with my paintbrush, and I'm going to darken the letters. And also you can see there are some smudges, so I'm going to take my white paint and I'm just going to cover that up. That's nothing to be concerned about. If it happens to you, you just go back and paint over those spaces or those areas. And so here it is in my booth. I love how this turned out. If you enjoyed this project, please comment below and let me know. And once again, thank you for joining me today. I hope that you enjoyed these projects. If you did, please give it a thumbs up Subscribe to my channel and hit the notification bell so that every time I release another video, you'll be notified. Thanks for watching.